Hi. Today's history story comes from princesses behaving badly, and it is Njinga of Ndongo, the princess who kept male concubines in drag. She lived from 1581 until 1663 in what is present-day Angola. The year was 1621. Princess Njinga was charged by her half-brother Mbandi, ruler of the West African kingdom of Ndongo, to meet with Portuguese officials. For decades, the two powers had been fighting an on-and-off war, with the Europeans trying to seize more territory and resources. Now a treaty seemed possible, but when Njinga met with the Portuguese governor, she was faced with a blatant power play intended to humiliate her. While the governor lounged comfortably like a king on a throne, Njinga was not even offered a chair. The princess was having none of this nonsense. At her gesture, one of her maidservants got down on hands and knees. Njinga then sat on the woman's back and addressed the governor as an equal. The negotiations were successful, and the peace treaty was signed, and just a few years later, Njinga would be sitting on a throne of her own, and it wouldn't be made of maidservants. Njinga was the eldest daughter of the ruler of the Ndongo kingdom, a loose federation of Mbundu-speaking tribes in what is now the Central African state of Angola. At the time of her birth, the country was roughly 100 years into a complicated relationship with the Portuguese. The colonizers had arrived in the area in 1483 and had been working hard to enslave or convert the population ever since. This situation didn't exactly sit well with the people of Ndongo, though not entirely for the reasons you might think. A slave trade already existed between Ndongo and Congo, its neighbor to the north, largely in war captives. By the 1500s, the two countries shared this trade with the Portuguese. But the Europeans were always angling for a bigger piece of the pie. The Ndongo nation fought several wars with Portuguese forces over independence and control of the slave trade and profitable salt and silver mines. Of course, that didn't mean that Africans and Europeans were always at odds. If, say, the king of Congo was getting a little grabby in their territory, Ndongo rulers called on the Portuguese as allies. But in 1575, the Portuguese upped the tension by establishing a colony at the city of Luanda, located between the two kingdoms' territories, and started to stir up dissension among some of the disaffected factions nominally under Ndongo rule. Njinga's father, Ngola Kilajua, Ngola means king. The word was later taken by the Portuguese as the name of Angola, went to war against them, kicking off a protracted and bloody dispute. Princess Njinga was born into this uncertain landscape of shifting alliances and near constant conflict. Stories about her childhood read like something out of Girl's Own Adventure. She was a tomboy who could hold a spear like a warrior and preferred climbing trees to doing more traditional girl things. She also didn't take any crap. She once beat her half-brother Mbandi bloody after he stole her beaded necklace, humiliating him in front of the entire village. The mythos about Njinga tells us that she grew into a strong, proud, decisive princess, the kind who was born to rule. But when her father died in 1617, her gender precluded her from ascending to the throne. it was Mbandi who became king, but only after murdering another brother, as well as Njinga's infant son. As you might imagine, Mbandi was neither a benevolent nor a sensible ruler. One story claims that when Njinga spoke out against his plans to pit his spear-armed warriors in open battle against the cannon-armed Portuguese, he inflicted terrible punishment. The Portuguese also knew his faults and pressed their advantage, sending missionaries and soldiers farther into Ndongo territory. So in 1621, Princess Njinga was sent by her cowardly, villainous sibling to meet with the Portuguese governor and negotiate the end of hostilities. Njinga forced the governor to meet her eye to eye, both figuratively and literally. The treaty was signed. The Portuguese recognized the sovereignty of the Mbundu-speaking people, and all it cost was the return of a few European captives. 3 years later, Mbandi was dead, and Njinga took the throne with the backing of a grateful people. She re-engaged the Portuguese after they broke the peace treaty, surprise, and relocated her subjects to a more defensible location in the highlands. From there, Njinga directed a guerrilla war that left the invaders demoralized and weakened, holding them off for 4 decades. After her death, the kingdom disintegrated. Yet, even as Ndongo became Angola under Portuguese rule, her people still remembered her. In 1860, a Scottish missionary recorded meeting an Angolan man who told him, "In Angola, every living, breathing thing, down to the last blade of grass in your path, still remembers our great queen." So now you have heard the lore. The reality is messier and bloodier. Rather than deferring to her brother until her country needed her, Njinga had in fact been looking for a path to the throne since her father's death. Because Ndongo precedent disallowed women rulers, she publicly supported Mbandi, while busily amassing supporters and justifications for her own claim to the throne. When Njinga met with the governor in 1621, she really did use her maidservant as a chair. But that gutsy move may have been motivated more by her own political ambitions than by a desire to represent her people. Njinga wanted the Portuguese to reinforce her claim to the throne. Given the political realities of colonized Central Africa, the best way to accomplish that goal was to share a religion with the invaders. So Njinga was baptized as a Christian in 1622. She took as her new Christian name Ana de Sousa, the name of the governor's wife. Mbandi's death was the opening Njinga needed. Pretty much everyone agrees that she created that opportunity herself by poisoning him. Her apologists later claimed that she had only done so because he was an awful ruler, and she was desperate to protect her people. But as ambitious as she was, Njinga was not the popular choice for ruler, owing to her gender and the pervasive suspicion that she'd killed Mbandi. So she initially stepped up as regent for Mbandi's 8-year-old son. Within 2 years, however, she had her nephew murdered and assumed power. Njinga's power grab precipitated an internal war, prompting her to call on the Portuguese for support. Unfortunately for her, they sided with a rival faction whose male heir was more malleable to their own agenda. Njinga renounced Christianity and made it her life's mission, for a while at least, to thwart Portuguese efforts to monopolize the slave trade. She even began to offer sanctuary to slaves who escaped Portuguese coastal plantations, in the process swelling the ranks of her supporters. This succession war led to one of the more grisly aspects of Njinga's reign, her alliance of convenience with the Mbangala, marauding bands of mercenaries. In probably the first documented instances of African child soldiers, the Mbangala descended upon villages with a bloody ferocity, enslaving children and killing everyone before moving on to the next town. Starting in 1628, Njinga not only employed Mbangala soldiers, but, to keep them loyal, also claimed that she was Mbangala. It is unlikely that she was ever initiated formally into the tribe, which involved a gruesome ritual. 2 decades later, she symbolically attempted to distance herself from their bloody rites by reconverting to Christianity, which had the added benefit of allowing her to call on the Portuguese to support her plans for hereditary succession. With Njinga's tenuous grasp on the throne as the backdrop, some of her stranger actions as a ruler make more sense, especially what she did to cast herself as the king of the Mbundu-speaking people. For one thing, she took several husbands at a time, as many as 50 or 60, and called them concubines. Njinga's gender-bending habits asserted her identity as king, as did her martial prowess. She led her troops skillfully in battle, and had her ladies-in-waiting equipped and trained as soldiers to serve as her personal bodyguards. Given how long she ruled, her efforts to cast herself as king seem to have worked. But eventually, Njinga was forced by the Portuguese and internal factions arrayed against her to decamp to the highlands. Her Ndongo lands were given over to a puppet king in service to the foreign powers. Her retreat was a strategic one, however, offering more freedom to engage the Portuguese in the kind of battle her warriors could win, guerrilla warfare. Njinga also took territory as far as 500 miles inland, using war captives to fuel her slave trade. Within a few years, she conquered the kingdom of Matamba and made it her base, turning it into one of the most important and wealthiest states in Central Africa. By 1640, she was the region's most powerful African king. She ruled much of the land formerly belonging to the Ngola puppet king, and controlled a commercial slave trade circuit that sold upward of 13,000 enslaved Africans a year. But in 1650, after nearly 25 years of warfare, Njinga again found it politically palatable to make friends with the Portuguese. Her Dutch allies, who'd long supported her efforts to harass the Portuguese, had left the region in 1648. Not only that, Njinga was getting older and had begun worrying about who would take over after she was gone. An alliance with her old friends, foes, promised some measure of security. So she reconverted to Christianity, introduced Portuguese missionaries and ambassadors into her court, adopted European dress, and re-established trade with the Portuguese slavers. All was made official in a peace treaty in 1656. Njinga died in 1663 at the age of 82. Her death prompted a struggle for succession that led to the disintegration of the Ndongo Matamba kingdom. She had held it together by sheer force of will, and no one else could do that. In the 350 years since her death, Njinga has been rehabilitated into the heroine of colonial resistance who rejected the yoke of foreign rule. She was never more important as a symbol than during Angola's struggle for freedom in the 20th century, which culminated in independence in 1975. Although the details of her mythology aren't exactly accurate, there is one point her legend does get right. Njinga was a warrior who forced the colonials to deal with her as an equal. The end.